Welcome to Fire Your Doctor. I believe this is episode 5. And this is my wife, Dr. Danielle Lockwood.
And this is my husband, Richard Lockwood.
So what are we talking about today?
Well, we're going to be talking about the dangers of antibiotics.
Oh, that's fun. Funny, I think we had a quote at the beginning of a certain chapter in a certain book that might be relevant.
Absolutely. Go ahead and read it for us, Richard.
Oh, thanks for asking. Look at this guy. This is our author's copy of our new book, Fire Your Doctor. And here we go. Chapter 3, The War on Germs. Now, when the unclean spirit comes out of a person, it passes through waterless places seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came. When it comes, it finds it unoccupied, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they come in and live there, and the last condition of that person becomes worse than the first. And that is actually out of the Bible, and it is Matthew 12:43 to 45. So what does a 2,000-year-old book have to do with antibiotics?
Antibiotics are like a bomb going off. Now I just want to give this disclaimer, and I talk about this in the book too, especially during COVID or when there's an extreme situation. It's really just about the patient's willingness too. Because if I had my druthers, if it was me, I would try all the things before I would do any antibiotics, knowing what I know about antibiotics. However, I often don't have that luxury.
Luxury of time.
Luxury of time.
Non-emergency.
People have waited too long sometimes to come in and I will definitely try the naturopathic stuff. If they're able to come in the office, we can do ozone treatments. We can do UVBI, which we'll talk about in a second. But I have to send them with a prescription for an antibiotic just in case.
Right. So specifically, the context of this quote in the Bible is about Jesus drives a demon out of a human, and the human has their life is transformed. Maybe a problem or a psychological issue or something that they had been really plagued by, could have been a physical ailment, has now left that person, and they are like this house that has been just swept clean of everything, right? And then the demon that left is pushed out into this kind of outer darkness, this waterless place where it's just suffering and alone. At some point, the demon asks itself, just what am I doing out here? Why don't I try to go back to where I was before? And goes back to the person that has been swept clean of this unclean spirit, and it finds this completely empty and unoccupied house. And then what does it do? It doesn't just go back by itself. It's I'm going to bring all of my friends and we're really going to conquer this territory now. And how does that relate specifically to the pattern of antibiotic use?
Yes, that is exactly what happens. The bomb goes off in the gut and in the body, and then superbacteria form.
Okay.
And mess up with your natural microbiome, which we'll talk about. And you end up with a proclivity or I'm like, how to say proclivity in a not intellectual way, but you have a higher chance of developing diseases.
A worse infection
down the road.
Right.
Resistance to antibiotics when you really need them, and you've got, surgery, or you've got a major illness.
Right. So what we're saying is we're drawing an analogy that if you just have this, if we have something bad going on, we have this solution that just kind of just sweeps away everything, then you are going to create this kind of empty space, this empty vessel that then is prone to being filled in the future with something even worse than the problem that we were trying to solve.
Absolutely.
And so I think there's a number of ways to attack that. Later on in the book, we talk about our microbiome, because what do we ideally, and in the Bible there, in that quote, the context is that you should fill that with God. that now this evil, this unclean spirit, this attacking spirit, this anxiety, whatever got taken out of you is now gone. And now you have to fill that with gratitude to God, with virtue, with the Holy Spirit. And if we're we got that unclean spirit out, now we need the clean spirit in. And if we don't, then we're empty, and that empty vessel is going to be filled with something even worse. And so medically, you will see this pattern where it's like, I had this, I had that, I had bacterial pneumonia, I had something, I took an antibiotic, and now I'm getting sick, and now my digestion's off. And so let's talk about that.
Well, yeah. And then something to point out with that is it doesn't happen right away. I mean, it could happen months or years down the road, and you don't even know that it was related to that antibiotic treatment that you had.
Okay.
So that's tricky.
Yeah.
Like, did that cause it? So one of the questions I'll ask on an intake questionnaire is, hey, how many times
have you ever
had antibiotics? And did you have a lot when you were a kid? One of the places where you're getting it a lot is while you're a kid, they're so worried the kid is going to have a fever or whatever, that they are just like, well, let's just give them antibiotics because they've got an ear infection. And I'm not saying don't treat the ear infection. I'm just saying there's other ways to treat the ear infection.
That antibiotics may not be as specific as we'd like to think. And that to generalize, when we get rid of the germs that are the bad guys, we kind of get rid of everything, and then we create the strong potential for that empty vessel.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
Well
great.
put.
Great.
Well put. So why then we want to refill it? So then you might hear well, it's totally fine because after I had antibiotics, I just had some yogurt and I had a Culturelle and I had a couple probiotics. Like, I should be good to go.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think that there's a quote in the book that deals with that, and that is like, eating some yogurt or taking a probiotic is not going to atone for a microbiome genocide.
I love that quote.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, my digestion has been destroyed kind of way. Fun. But yeah, we look at ourselves, and we do this socially and on an emotional and a spiritual level. We look at ourselves as these islands. But the truth is we are in community with other humans. We're in community with nature around us. And ideally and properly, we should be in communion with God. With that, there are, by some estimates, just as many little microbes in you than there are actual human cells in your body.
Yeah. So we need to be cognizant of that, which we dedicated 3 chapters to in the book.
We do, yeah. So we've got to, it's hard to talk about antibiotics without talking about that. But we're kind of going microbiome heavy, but we needed to touch on it a little bit. So
it's not as simple as just taking a probiotic with an antibiotic. Yep. I think that's a basic thing that you should do. However, it's a deeper discussion, because even if you don't take antibiotics or haven't taken them since you were a young kid, or maybe have never had them, like, thank God our children have never had antibiotics, actually. But they have, because they are everywhere. Yeah. Can you name a few locations where we might all, as human beings, be exposed to antibiotics?
Food.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Where, antibiotics are in our meat supply, our dairy. They're used in
a lot of soaps,
antibacterial. We're going to talk about that in a second.
Yeah, we're kind of blending a little bit of antimicrobial, antibacterial, antibiotics. So just in general, it's kind of a catch-all category of things that are supposed to save us from germs, and what is the fallout of that. Yeah.
So they're pretty much everywhere, especially used in the meat packing industry and things like that. I mean, there's really no way to avoid them because they're used on livestock, unless you are growing it yourself and eating it yourself.
I don't know if you guys can hear the rooster in the background, but he might be like one such antibiotic free. Like, he's getting loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Roy. Word. So
he might be cooked.
I want to read this. And I'm going to read it up here. So I have to look down while I'm doing it. You can see the book here.
It's a beautiful book.
This beautiful book. By the way, Tim at Dissect Designs did this. Tim in the UK.
Cover, yeah.
We love Tim. He did a great job. Okay. Supporters of routine antibiotics often cite clinical studies, but the results depend on what's being measured. For example, a study might show that a drug helped lab mice fight an infection, but that doesn't guarantee it will be effective in broader contexts. After the study, we euthanize the mice, so we never know what long-term effects the drug may have had on them. Then we try the drug on humans and mass produce it, often with commercials promoting it on CNN. In these studies, we typically find what we're looking for, but we often overlook the long-term impact of giving millions of doses to people, the potential effects on the population, and the environment. Other studies highlight how antibiotics can increase the risk of various diseases and disorders, revealing that antibiotics are not as selective as we'd like to believe.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Actually, we did.
Yeah. No, I deeply resonate with that. And I think that this is one of the problems that we run into with, honestly, the scientific method, where the scientific method, we are trying to eliminate externalities in a study. We are trying to get our subject and our control group and all these things going such that we are only studying, did this pill get rid of this infection? And that is our metric for success.
But the good news is,
What's up?
If they take the antibiotics and then they get a yeast infection, then they get to have another medication for the yeast. And then when they have chronic yeast infections, then they develop IBS. And so then they get to have more new products that are coming out for that.
That sounds so exciting.
It's just like
That's great.
Innovation, just all over the place.
Yeah, it's like...
Yeah.
I could riff on that. I'm not going to. I'm going to drive by. No, I think that let's go back to one of the things where when they are doing a lot of these scientific studies, particularly the animal studies, after the study's over and they're like, okay, well, I guess this, the lab mice got better after we gave them the pill. When that study concludes, it's standard practice to euthanize all the mice. Mm-hmm. And so I think what we're getting at is, what are the consequences 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years down the road from that antibiotic use? Like, what if we killed off the infection, but we also killed off a gut microbe that helps you process vitamin B6?
Exactly.
And what's that going to do?
K2.
Yeah, now that you're, say, perimenopausal and your thyroid doesn't work.
Right. I would say I'll just use myself as an example. I had a lot of antibiotics growing up.
Nice.
I had a lot of gut issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they were absolutely connected to each other. The solution, why? Well, and Mom, I'm not blaming you. I love you. And I think you did what the doctor told you to do.
Did she really make it to episode 5? Like, we'll find out.
Mom, but we used to go and get the pink stuff, like the amoxicillin. It's like at the first sign of strep throat, it was like, oh, strep throat, this could cause this, this, and this. This is crazy.
Get it out of here.
I mean, the truth is, like, we lost the art of knowing how to treat those infections with herbs, with hydrotherapy. Like, I'm not saying they don't need to be treated. I'm just saying antibiotics shouldn't be the first line solution for it.
It is a fair question to ask. I mean, why not just be like, I'm sick. I'm just going to be sick right now.
Well, and they're also...
I'm going to train my immune system to be stronger next time.
Yes, and there are, fertility consequences for strep throat that's untreated properly.
Fair.
Heart valve issues that can form from strep throat that's not treated properly. We know about this, right?
I know somebody.
Yes.
Somebody.
So I'm not saying it's not dangerous. I'm just saying how we treat it, but we should treat it. But it doesn't need to necessarily be antibiotics. Yeah. And sometimes it does. Sometimes it's gone so extreme that it is time for that to step in and do that.
Yeah. I think there's also this way of basically, what was it? It was one of the kind of American founding fathers. He was like, maybe Ben Franklin. the people that trade safety for freedom are going to lose both or something. I'm
I think
butchering
it was
it.
Jefferson.
Was that Jefferson? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think there's this way that we have gone to view germs as like these public enemies that must be defeated at all costs. And that is going to have a fallout, because it's like the more I cleanse my environment to be absolutely germ free, I'm losing that resilience. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, there is a learning process that happens in your body every time you get sick. Your body and your immune system is your vaccine, actually, because there's a learning process that happens when you get sick, and you have a very robust immune response to that same pathogen the next time it comes around.
Yeah, I think you have a phrase somewhere like lick the dog.
Lick the dog. Yeah, it's in the microbiome.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth noting. It's definitely worth noting. You absolutely can build a robust immune system by, this is the whole everybody's really into cold plunge, right? It's stressing the body out. It's using that process of good stress on the body. Yeah. The hormesis is what it's called. And hormesis. And it helps to build and gives you heat shock proteins. So one of the things to do, which we should have by the fall, wink, wink, is sauna. Do a sauna when you're sick.
Is it sauna or sauna?
It's sauna.
Sauna.
For all of our Scandinavian friends.
We love you.
Guten Tagen. I don't even. Guten Morgen? Good morning?
That's Deutsch. That's German.
They like saunas too. Yeah.
Okay, great.
So German people.
Everybody's going to say, I don't know. Okay, fine.
Everybody is getting it. Okay.
Yeah.
But saunas are wonderful because it's a stress on the body that pushes that robust immune response.
So what you're saying is that some exposure to enemies in the form of germs could actually be beneficial.
Yes.
Okay, great.
And I would say it's how the human race has survived all of these years.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we look at it, we didn't really see, it's complicated. We don't have time to get into the whole history of disease, but let's talk about germ theory. So, okay, discovery time. Hey, guess what? There's these microbes. We cannot see them. That's this invisible enemy. When those things start growing in a body and take over your body, you get sick, maybe you even die. If we can get rid of these tiny invaders, then we win and I'm safe. And, roll credits and like Tom Cruise in a jet.
Roll it up. If that was the case, let's just use some logic. If that was the case and the germs were the bad thing and we would have been done.
You did it.
No,
you ruined it.
My hand. Stop it. Hey.
Our new smart cameras have this thing where if you make certain hand gestures, it interprets it to like time to ruin your footage.
Yeah.
Like is basically what it's doing.
So
germ theory. So
yeah, germ theory.
But we need to acknowledge germ theory is narrowly true.
Yes.
Like I've got whatever MRSA in this cut and it's growing and I'm going to kill that MRSA off and then I'm going to live and recover, hopefully.
Yes. Well, or should we wash our hands before we do a procedure or
Sure. Okay. An invasive sterile
environment.
Kind of
Absolutely.
environment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Glove, PPE, all that stuff. Yeah. So germ theory is narrowly true. We're not necessarily going to, but I would say where the wheels fall off is when it's like, these germs are the bad guys, so now we need to go into kind of like a war of extermination.
Right.
So why does that go wrong?
Well, it goes wrong because it's narrowly thinking of that moment of survival. So I think where it's actually focused, where it's good, is when you're in a war situation or when you're in an emergency situation. It's like, yeah, you're in war. You're going to do the thing to keep a person alive, right?
Right.
But if we're talking about sustainability and prevention and how do we make ourselves harder to kill, that's really terrain theory. And terrain theory is, hey, weeds don't like to grow in certain types of soil, so maybe we make the soil a place where weeds, aka bacteria, doesn't like to grow.
Or like the wrong kind of bacteria.
The wrong type of bacteria.
Yeah. Let's not
right?
forget about fungus. Everybody's like, oh, like all on bacteria. But
Fungus,
like, or
too.
fungi
Fungus
or like...
Fungus among us.
They're so...
And viruses, too.
Yeah.
You know, viruses
That's interesting.
seem to be part of the microbiome to some extent.
Right. So it's like there's a base level where it's like, I am going to find every criminal on the entire planet or anybody that might happen to commit a crime in the future, and we're going to lock them up, get rid of them in advance, and then I won't even need a door lock. I will never need to lock my door. I'll never need to lock my car. My car won't even need a key. I'll just kind of like, anybody can just drive it away because the world is now perfectly safe.
Nice thought.
Nice thought. Yeah, so that I would say would be germ theory applied universally, where it's like, okay, hey, we can do some basics to like, you know, make our society like safe and equitable for people. At the end of the day, though, I'm going to need to take some personal responsibility and just say, hey, you know, there might be some bad things out in the world. I need to do what I can to kind of protect myself. Maybe I will lock my door. Maybe I will have some kind of basics. Maybe I will do some basic kind of protection things so that, guess what? Bad guys are going to be out there. Germs are going to be out there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay.
So the other thing that we're running into is that we're running out of antibiotics. So
what do you mean by that?
Because we're so exposed to these low level antibiotics through the food, and that I think it's not as prevalent as it was when we were growing up, but there's a loosey-goosey nature to prescribing antibiotics. Well, let's just take some amoxicillin. Let's just do this. Let's just do that. I think doctors are actually more, I would say conventional doctors are more,
Culture's starting to change a little bit.
It's starting to shift a little bit, so they're not handing it out so frequently.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is that there is not enough there's evolving superbugs, and there's nothing to really handle it. So at this point, we can go up to vancomycin, I believe, which is a drip dose of an antibiotic, very, very strong antibiotic.
Yeah, IV.
And there isn't too much after that.
Right. So basically the idea is that if we do have these powerful hospital grade prescription antibiotics that we might need to save your life in some kind of an emergency, I don't want to undermine those by putting low dose triclosan in everybody's soap that they wash their entire body with every single day.
Okay.
So
let's hold on. We're going to talk about triclosan in just a second, but I want to give you this quote.
Okay, great.
I'm going to just read the disclaimer too, because I think it's important. Okay. Disclaimer. I'm no friend of the World Health Organization, the WHO. Nonetheless, a 2020 report from the WHO found the following to be true. Declining private investment and lack of innovation in developing new antibiotics undermined efforts to combat drug-resistant infections. This statement implies that less money is spent on developing antibiotics than any other drug. This gives companies a strong incentive to invest in new antibiotics. The report goes on to say that, quote, 2 new reports reveal a weak pipeline for antibiotic agents. The 60 products in development, 50 antibiotics, and 10 biologics bring little benefit over existing treatments, and very few target the most critical resistant bacteria, aka gram-negative bacteria, while preclinical candidates, which are those early stage testing, are more innovative. It will take years to reach patients. So in plain English...
Did that get flipped around like backwards somewhere?
I don't know. But
I think it did.
But basically it's this. They don't want to develop it because there's no money in it.
Yeah, I think somewhere...
I think that's where it got messed up. And the early stage of testing takes forever. And by the time we actually get it to the point where the germs could be beneficial to these new products, they would have already evolved. So we're already past we're way too slow for the curve. Superbugs are emerging faster than we're making new antibiotics. Logically, making new antibiotics will create even more superbugs. We're in double trouble.
Yeah, I think that's... Speaking of typos, no, somebody changed that. This is what you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Live edits, yes, yeah. Exactly. No. So, Private investment and lack of innovation in developing are low. Why?
No. Yeah,
There's there's also no money in antibiotics too.
Yeah.
They're
So
not
there's a
making as much.
de-incentivized.
They're de-incentivized to actually develop them.
Well, yeah, and especially when you're talking about something that's only going to be used in a worst case scenario. That's not going to be something that's pharmaceutical companies would rather develop something that's going to be used by everyone all the time. So
Okay. So we're running out of antibiotics anyway.
right.
So what is the solution for that? We're actually going to talk about that in our next episode. We've already kind of talked about it, which is, hey, get your body to have a good fever and managing fevers, right? There's herbs. We're going to talk about these things. Okay. There's herbs to use. But we talk about going in the sauna.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, getting your heat up, going in the sauna, just drinking fluids. Just half the time it's electrolytes. You need electrolytes to combat a fever. Especially with the kiddos and ear infections. Why are they getting an ear infection? It's most likely they've gotten too much sugar. They're getting into peanuts. They're drinking dairy that they can't digest. Like, it's usually something to do with their gut health. It's, so preventing those things, getting their nasal passages to drain properly, working on their structure. There's so many things to do that we could do an entire episode on just treating those particular things. My point is there's lots of ways to treat these things before we get to antibiotics.
Yeah, before we move on to the next section, there's one thing that I wanted to kind of just say. When we're dealing with an antibiotic, if we treat with an antibiotic and we kill off 90% of that offending pathogen, what's left?
10% of the strongest pathogen of that pathogen.
Okay, so then then that one kind of rebuilds back stronger than ever, and it's kind of getting back to our quote at the beginning. And then what happens when we use an even stronger antibiotic on them?
That maybe 1% survive, and then they build back.
Okay, and then it takes them maybe you recover, but next time. And so what I'm describing is kind of a process of kind of a unnatural selection, or kind of a magnification process where every time we treat, and this is also part of the problem with kind of the background level antibiotics, because we're weeding out all of the kind of weaker pathogens. The weaker germs are continually and artificially kind of killed off, and then only the strongest survive. And so because these germs can multiply so quickly, we could get through, even in the course of an illness, multiple generations of these guys, right? Yep. To where all of a sudden we're training the next generation of superbugs how to get past our defenses next time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is there a place where the antibiotic, if a person is about to die, right, and they are so sick, and there's a story in here actually that we put of the first person who took antibiotics,
like penicillin,
yeah, and that she was Anne Schaefmiller in 1942, and so we talk about how amazing that was. Otherwise, she would have passed away. However, really what did the rest of the recovery for her was it knocked down enough of the bacteria for her immune system to come in and make a recovery.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So we also want to go, okay, and how do we support the soil? So even if you have to do that, how do we properly support that background? Okay.
Great.
So let's just really quick talk about antibacterial soaps.
Okay, perfect.
Triclosan, and then we'll land the plane, okay?
Okay.
All right. So triclosan is, I want to read this quote. Let's back up. Triclosan is a low-grade antibacterial and antifungal that's added to toothpastes. So Crest Multicare has this.
Does it still have it?
Total.
I thought they took it out lately.
No, they have it.
Oh, okay.
And anything pretty much that says antibacterial. So antibacterial Dawn and antibacterial soap. Now, there was lawsuits that pulled it out, and they had a certain number of years to fully get it out of the market, because they realized that all of this is going into the water supply, which is then killing off plants and making a lot of bacterial resistance. And this is a quote from the industrial scale stupidity surrounding antibacterial household products is not a secret. Okay, so this isn't just Dr. Danny and Richard Lockwood upset about antibacterial products, okay?
In our basement.
In our basement. It is our studio, I'll have you know.
It's a daylight basement, so there's like
okay.
big windows that lead to outside.
Okay. An FDA official was quoted as follows, quote, "No data demonstrates that these drugs provide additional protection from disease and infections. Using these products might give people a false sense of security," Michelle says, that's their last name. "If you use these products because you think they protect you more than soap and water, that's incorrect. If you use them because of how they feel, many other products have similar formulations but won't expose your family to unnecessary chemicals. And some manufacturers have begun to revise these products to remove these ingredients," end quote. So they're not more beneficial. We talk about multiple studies in here about how the antibacterial, literally in the slums of India, side by side, had no effect. In fact, regular good old-fashioned soap and water, a bar of soap and some water, outperformed the antibacterial.
Right. Or it was at least just as effective.
Yep.
Yeah. I think in general, we've got kind of a messy data set when we're talking about antibacterials and like antibiotics. And so we can say like, when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s, there was a video game called Oregon Trail, and it was like, "You've died of dysentery," kind of thing. And it was funny, except if it happened to you in real life. But those things in the kind of pre-industrial age, that used to be a factor, or in kind of like the slums of, New York City or in London and these big cities prior to the modern world.
Yeah.
Disease was rampant. And so it's tempting to say, now we got all this antibacterial soaps, now we got all these, everything else like vaccines and this whole stack, I would say, of industrial products. The other thing that changed, though, was greatly improved sanitation.
Yep.
Meaning that now we have electricity and we all have flushing toilets, we have indoor plumbing, whereas in if you were in London around the time of the Black Plague, there was, people just threw their garbage and their human waste, just kind of dumped it out of the window.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that public health measures in those ways and sanitation have done more good than many of these products that we're talking about.
Right. So I'm just saying that when you're just like, remember the bad old days before, like when everybody got sick and died all the time, I watched Little House on the Prairie, like whatever. All this terrible stuff happened. But we also have to look at, that's not just the medications. There's also just literally physical structures that were built like infrastructure, flushing toilets, running water that's hopefully safe unless you're in Flint, Michigan, and electricity in the home.
Yeah, exactly. So those are just some of the things that we'll talk about with antibiotics. In our next episode, we're going to get deeper into the diseases, like more long-term diseases that have been related to sort of the long-term effects of antibiotics. So there's some short-term effects for using the antibiotics, and then there's the long-term effects. And I think those ones are going to be eye-opening for those who...
And that also touches a lot on microbiome as well, which is why later in the book we dedicated 3 chapters to that. Or are you thinking about like kind of stuff like tendon rupture and just some of those other things?
Oh yeah, I didn't even mention tendon rupture. But yeah, those, I would say I could add that to the thing. We can talk about tendon rupture with the ciprofloxacin.
Yeah, I was gonna say Cipro.
And
at least you don't have a UTI though.
Yeah. And so we'll talk about those things, but I'm talking more chronic disease. I'm talking about diabetes, autoimmune, and cancer.
Right.
And we're going to build a case for there is a connection between those who have had at least multiple uses of antibiotics over the years, having a higher proclivity, I get to say that again, propensity to developing these
more
diseases.
likely.
More likely.
Yeah, and I think at some point, I don't remember where it was, but there was we cited a longitudinal study on antibiotic use and life expectancy. Like, meaning, if I'm taking antibiotics, on average, is my life going to be longer, and is my quality of life expectancy, where I'm able-bodied, able to function and have high quality of life, is that going to be longer with or without antibiotics? And a lot of the data is showing that statistically there's not really a long-term benefit to taking antibiotics, and maybe even harm.
Yep.
So, okay, but that's more like next episode, or?
Next episode.
Oh, well, that's super fun. When are we talking about steroids? That's like later on?
That's the next of the next.
The next of the
We're
next.
moving on.
Okay, yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. We will see you soon.
In
Goodbye.
10 minutes when we record the next one. Bye.
Bye.